battlefield roared with chaos. Plasma fire streaked through the air, burning the sky of Sthakar Prime a violent shade of purple. The ground trembled as explosions tore through the rocky terrain, sending shockwaves through the bodies of soldiers, both human and alien, who fought in the Coalition Dominion War. Lieutenant Vela Squari had seen war before. She had heard the screams of the fallen, smelled the acrid scent of burning armor, and felt the weight of a rifle in her four-fingered hands. But never had she felt what she did now. She was lying on her back, staring at the twin moons of her homeworld, unable to move. Her head swam, her ears rang. Something felt wrong. When she looked down, the horror of it struck her like a hammer. Her left leg was gone. Where it should have been was a jagged, charred stump, seeping dark blue blood into the dirt. A Dominion landmine had taken her limb, and she hadn't even felt it at first. Shock had dulled the pain, but now it was catching up, sending sharp, searing agony up her nerves. She sucked in a breath, biting down hard to stop herself from screaming. Not because of the pain, but because of what came next. She knew what happened to crippled soldiers. Vela turned her head, searching desperately for her unit. They were retreating, their silver armor flashing as they pulled back toward the extraction point. She tried to push herself up, tried to call out, "Wait, I'm still here." No one turned. Her own people were abandoning her. She had fought beside them, bled with them, risked her life to protect them. And yet, now that she was wounded, they had left her behind like she was nothing. Her heart pounded. Was this truly how it ended? Alone, discarded, bleeding out in the dirt? No, she refused to accept that. She gritted her teeth and reached for the emergency beacon strapped to her belt. Her hands were slick with blood, but she fumbled with the device, pressing it desperately. A faint blue light blinked. A distress signal. Maybe someone, anyone, would hear it. But as the minutes passed, her body grew colder. Her vision blurred at the edges. It was too late. Then, through the swirling dust and smoke, a figure approached. A human. Vela forced her hazy vision to focus. He was tall, clad in battered Coalition armor, the red cross of a field medic emblazoned on his shoulder plate. His helmet was missing, revealing a scarred face and dark eyes that scanned the battlefield with practiced efficiency. He moved fast, ducking behind debris, avoiding enemy fire. And then, he was at her side. "Shit," he muttered, kneeling beside her. His voice was deep, steady, but urgent. "You're in bad shape." Vela blinked up at him. She knew this human. Captain Reese Voss, the Coalition's chief field medic. She had heard of him, a reckless fool who threw himself into danger for soldiers who weren't even his own species. "Leave me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am discarded." Reese scoffed. "Not happening." His hands moved with precision, pulling a tourniquet from his medkit and tightening it around her thigh. The pain was instant and excruciating. She choked back a cry. "Good," Reese said. "Means you're still alive." She struggled to breathe. "Extraction. Point. Too far." "Yeah, no shit," he muttered. He scanned the battlefield, calculating. "You can't walk. I'm carrying you." Vela shook her head weakly. "Dead weight. Liability." Reese ignored her and grabbed her under the shoulders, hauling her up. She gasped at the sudden movement, pain lancing through her. Her vision swam, but she felt his strength, solid, unwavering. "You're not dying here," he said. "Not today." Blaster fire rained around them as he lifted her into his arms and sprinted toward the Coalition's last stronghold. Vela wanted to protest, wanted to push him away. But instead, she found herself gripping his armor, holding on as he carried her through fire and smoke. For the first time since the explosion, she felt something other than pain, hope. Vela awoke to the rhythmic beeping of a monitor. The scent of antiseptics and sterilized air filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the scorched battlefield she last remembered. The tent's dim lighting cast soft shadows on the metallic walls, and the distant hum of machinery indicated she was in a coalition field hospital. She blinked, her vision adjusting. The pain was there, dull but persistent, a constant reminder of what had been taken from her. Slowly, her gaze trailed down to where her left leg should have been. Nothing. Just a thick layer of bandages wrapped tightly around the stump. Reality crashed down on her like a collapsing structure. The war, the landmine, her own people abandoning. Her, everything had led to this moment. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to break. Sthakari warriors did not mourn their wounds, they accepted them. But what if she couldn't? The sound of boots against the metal floor made her snap. Her head up. A familiar figure stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Rhys Voss, the human medic who had saved her life. "You're awake," he observed. His dark eyes assessed her condition, as if gauging how close she still was to death. Vela studied him in return. His coalition-issued armor was still scuffed and dirt-streaked from the battlefield. But he had removed the chest plate, leaving only a fitted undershirt that clung to his frame. A faint scar ran along his left cheek, disappearing beneath the stubble on his jaw. "You stabilized me," she murmured. It wasn't a question. Rhys walked over and sat on a nearby crate, arms resting on his knees. "Yeah, took some work though. You lost too much blood. I had to do a transfusion." Vela frowned. Sthakari and human blood are not compatible. Normally, no. But coalition medics carry universal plasma in emergency cases. Not perfect, but it kept you alive. He leaned back slightly, watching her reaction. "Figured you'd prefer that over the alternative." The alternative being death. She exhaled sharply. "You should not have wasted resources on me." Rhys let out a short, humorless laugh. "You call that a waste? You think I drag someone through a war zone, keep them breathing, just so I can let them die in a hospital bed?" Vela looked away. "Among my people, a warrior who can no longer fight is considered without purpose." Rhys scoffed. "That's the dumbest thing I've heard all week. And I've been listening to military officers argue over rations." She turned back to him, narrowing her violet eyes. "You mock my culture." He shook his head. "No, I mock stupid rules that get good people killed." Silence stretched between them. Rhys studied her carefully, as if weighing his next words. Then, after a moment, he said, "I can fix this." Vela frowned. "Fix what?" "Your leg." She stiffened. "I know how your people feel about cybernetics," Rhys continued. "You don't use them. You see them as dishonorable, unnatural. But that's bullshit. You don't have to let this injury define you. I can get you a synthetic leg, one that works just as well as the one you lost. Maybe even better." Vela's stomach twisted. The idea was unthinkable. Among the Sthakari, those who relied on artificial enhancements were seen as weak, as something less than whole. Warriors who lost limbs were expected to retire in quiet. Shame never to see battle again. And yet, she had been abandoned. Her own people had left her to die. Why should she care about their traditions now? "You would do this?" she asked slowly. Rhys held her gaze. "Yeah, but only if you want it." Vela swallowed. Everything in her upbringing told her to reject the offer, to accept her fate. But as she looked at the human before her, the one person who had refused to leave her behind, she found herself considering a different choice, one that only he had given her. The field hospital's sterile air felt suffocating as Vela stared at her bandaged stump. The weight of Rhys's offer hung over her like a storm cloud. A synthetic leg, a chance to walk, to fight again. But at what cost? Her people would see her as dishonored. No true Sthakari warrior relied on machines to replace flesh. To them she would be broken, no longer whole. Yet, when she thought about them, the ones who had left her to die, she felt something new. A slow burning anger. Why should she cling to their judgment when they had already cast her aside? "You look like you're fighting a war in your head," Reese said from his seat nearby, his rough voice breaking the silence. Vela exhaled, her fingers gripping the edge of her medical cot. "I do not know if I can accept your offer." Reese leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because my people believe cybernetics make us less ourselves. We are taught that to lose a limb is to lose a part of our honor." Reese scoffed. "And leaving you to die was honorable?" She flinched. He continued, voice firm but not unkind. "You're not less because you got hurt. You're not less because you need help. And a cybernetic limb won't make you less either." He gestured toward her missing leg. "You think a piece of metal is what defines you. What matters is what you do with it." Vela clenched her jaw. "You do not understand. You are human. Your kind embraces machines." Reese let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, because we're smart enough to know survival matters more than pride." He met her gaze, his expression serious. "You want to let some ancient tradition decide your future, or do you want to make that choice yourself?" She had no answer. Instead, she closed her eyes, thinking. The ghosts of the past. She remembered her training, the grueling hours spent forging herself into a warrior. She had fought, bled, and nearly died to prove her worth. And yet, when she had needed them most, her people had abandoned her. Would they even care what happened to her now? She opened her eyes. "If I take this cybernetic leg, I can fight." "Again?" Reese gave a small nod. "Yeah, maybe not right away. But I'll make sure you walk, run, and kick someone's ass if you want to." A small, almost bitter smile touched her lips. "And you do this for all soldiers?" "Only the stubborn ones." For the first time, Vela really looked at him, not as a human, not as an outsider, but as someone who had saved her when no one else had. He hadn't done it out of duty or obligation. He had done it because he believed she deserved to live. Maybe, just maybe, she did. She took a slow breath and spoke the words that would change her future. "Do it." A new beginning. 2 days later, Vela sat in the medical bay, her stump wrapped in neural connectors, staring at the sleek, silver prosthetic attached to her thigh. The cybernetic limb was lighter than she expected, the polished metal reflecting. The dim overhead lights. Reese stood beside her, arms crossed. "All right, moment of truth. Let's get you on your feet." Vela hesitated, staring at the foreign limb. It didn't feel like her own. It felt wrong. "Here." Reese extended a hand. "Take it slow." She almost refused his help out of instinct, but this wasn't about pride. Not anymore. Swallowing her hesitation, she grasped his forearm. He steadied her as she shifted, placing weight onto the cybernetic leg. For a moment, panic seized her. What if it failed? What if she fell? But then, it held. Her balance wavered, but she stayed upright. A thrill ran through her as she took her first step, the servos humming softly beneath her weight. "I am standing," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Reese smirked. "Damn right you are." Vela flexed the mechanical foot, testing its movement. It was smooth, responsive, efficient. She met Reese's gaze. "I will walk. I will fight." "Yeah," he said, his voice softer now. "You will." And for the first time since the battlefield, she felt like she had a future again. The first step was the hardest. Vela clenched her jaw as she shifted her weight forward. The cybernetic leg responded smoothly, its servos humming softly, but it wasn't her leg. The sensation was strange. Too light, too precise, too perfect. The artificial limb moved as if it were an extension of her body, Yet her mind still screamed that something was missing. She took another step, and another. Each movement felt foreign, like trying to wield a blade with the wrong hand. But she refused to falter. She was Thakari, a warrior. If she could survive the battlefield, she could survive this. Across the room, Rhys watched with his usual half-smirk. "Not bad," he said. "Could have sworn you were about to fall flat." "On your ass, though." Vela shot him a glare. "I do not fall." Rhys chuckled. "Keep telling yourself that." She ignored him and focused on her movements. One step, then another. Slowly, the hesitation faded. The discomfort lessened. It wasn't natural, but it was possible, and that was enough. The test. By the end of the week, she had progressed from walking to running. The coalition medics had built a small training course in the field hospital's hangar, filled with uneven terrain and obstacles meant to push her limits. She stood at the start of the course, rolling her shoulders. Rhys leaned against a crate nearby, arms crossed. "You ready for this?" He, asked. Vela exhaled sharply. "I was ready days ago. You are the one delaying." Rhys raised an eyebrow. All right. Show me what you've got, metal legs." She ignored the nickname and took off. Her first steps were controlled, calculated. The synthetic limb adjusted with each movement, compensating for shifts in balance. As she reached the first obstacle, a set of uneven stone slabs, she hesitated for only a fraction of a second before leaping forward. The cybernetic limb propelled her higher than she expected, and she barely managed to land properly. Rhys whistled. "Damn, that thing's got some kick." Vela gritted her teeth. "I am the one doing this, not just the leg." Yeah, he said. "But let's see if you can keep up." She pushed forward, moving through the course with increasing speed. Her movements were still slightly unbalanced, but the more she moved, the more she adjusted. By the time she reached the final sprint, she wasn't thinking about the cybernetic limb anymore. She was running. As she crossed the finish line, she came to a stop, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Sweat dripped down her forehead, but she ignored it. Instead, she turned to Rhys. "Time?" she asked. Rhys glanced at the stopwatch in his hand. He let out a low whistle. "Faster than expected. Give it another week, and you'll be outrunning half the soldiers in this camp." She smirked, satisfaction settling in her chest. "Then I am ready to return to battle." Rhys's expression darkened. Slightly. "Vela." He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Are you sure that's what you want?" She stiffened. "Why would I not?" He sighed, stepping closer. "Look, I get it. You're a soldier. Fighting is what you do. But you almost died out there. Your own people left you behind. Maybe, just maybe, it's worth thinking about what you want, not just what's expected of you." Her jaw tightened. "You think I should run from war?" "I think you should have a choice," he said simply. A choice. It was something she had never considered. From the moment she could hold a blade, her fate had been decided. She would fight, she would serve, and she would die in battle. That was the way of her people. But now, standing here, her fate was no longer bound by tradition. It was in her hands. She met Rhys's gaze, something unreadable passing between them. For the first time, she wasn't entirely sure what she would choose. Vela had never known indecision. From the moment she was old enough to hold a blade, her path had been clear: train, fight, and prove herself. A warrior did not question their purpose. A warrior did not hesitate. And yet, here she was, standing, beneath the dim lights of the Coalition Field Hospital, questioning everything. She flexed the cybernetic limb, the artificial servos responding perfectly, almost too perfectly. She had regained her strength. She could run, she could fight. But now, Rhys had planted a dangerous thought in her mind. Was this truly what she wanted? Across the training area, Reese watched her, arms crossed, his dark eyes unreadable. "You've been quiet," he remarked. Vela looked away. "I have been thinking." "Yeah?" He leaned against a crate, casual as always, but she could sense the curiosity beneath his relaxed posture. "Thinking about what?" She hesitated. Admitting weakness, even uncertainty, was not the Sthakari way. But she was beginning to wonder if the Sthakari way had ever truly been her way. "When I was left on that battlefield, I believed I had no choice," she said finally. "My fate was decided for me. I was meant to die." She looked down at her mechanical leg, the polished metal reflecting the dim light. "But now, I am here, alive, and I have a choice for the first time in my life." Reese nodded slowly. "So, what do you want to do with it?" She exhaled sharply. "That is the question I cannot answer." The call of War A chime sounded from the communication terminal nearby. Reese sighed, pushing off the crate to answer it. Vela turned away, trying to push down the turmoil in her chest, but then she heard something that made her blood run cold. "We've received reports of an incoming Sthakari unit," the voice on the other end said. "They're requesting entry into the camp. They claim they're here for one of their own." Vela stiffened. Reese glanced at her, eyes wary. "Do they mean you?" She swallowed. "I do not know." Reese turned back to the comm. "How many soldiers?" "A small squad," the officer replied. "But they're heavily armed." "Something about this feels off." Reese frowned. "Tell them to wait outside the perimeter. We'll send someone to talk." The connection ended, and Reese turned to Vela. "You think they actually came to bring you home?" She wanted to believe it. But deep down, she knew the truth. Sthakari warriors who were lost in battle were not rescued. They were abandoned, forgotten. If they were here now, it was not for her. It was for something else. Reese studied her expression. "You don't trust them." She exhaled. "I trust what I know. And I know that my people do not reclaim lost warriors." His jaw tightened. "Then we'd better be careful." A dangerous reunion. The two of them approached the camp's perimeter together. The coalition soldiers had formed a defensive line, their weapons ready but not raised. Beyond them, the Sthakari warriors stood like statues, their armor glinting in the moonlight. One of them stepped forward. Vela recognized him immediately, Commander Zalvan, a high-ranking officer she had once fought alongside. His violet eyes locked onto her cybernetic leg before returning to her face. "You live," he said, his voice unreadable. "I do," she replied evenly. "You were lost in battle. We believed you dead." Her hands clenched at her sides. "I was lost. No one came for me." Zalvan's expression didn't change. "It is the way of war." A bitter laugh threatened to escape her lips. Of course, the way of war. The same excuse used to discard those who were no longer useful. But then Zalvan continued, "We have been given orders to retrieve you. You will return with us." Vela frowned. "For what purpose?" "You are still Sthakari," Zalvan said, "and we do not leave our own in the hands of humans." Reese took a step forward, crossing his arms. "Funny. You didn't seem too concerned about leaving your own when she was bleeding out on a battlefield." Zalvan barely spared him a glance. "This does not concern you, human." Reese scoffed. "See, that's where you're wrong. Because I am concerned." Zalvan's eyes darkened, but he turned back to Vela. "You have been given an opportunity to return. Do not refuse it." Vela felt her heartbeat quicken. She had spent weeks regaining her strength, preparing to fight again. But now, faced with her own people, she realized she was not the same warrior who had fallen on that battlefield. She had changed, and they had not. She looked at Zalvan, at the soldiers behind him, warriors who followed the same rigid code she had once believed in. And then she looked at Rhys, the human who had defied orders, risked everything, and given her a second chance. For the first time in her life, she had a choice, and she knew exactly what she had to do. She met Zalvin's gaze and spoke with unwavering certainty. "I am not going with you." Silence followed Vela's words, heavy and suffocating. The Sithakari warriors stiffened, their gazes sharpening like blades. Zalvin's expression did not change, but something dark flickered in his violet eyes. "You do not have a choice," he said, his voice calm but laced with unspoken threat. Vela exhaled slowly, stepping forward. "That is where you are wrong." Zalvin's lips pressed into a thin line. "You are Sthakari, a warrior. Your place is with us." "My place," she said, "is where I choose to be." The moment the words left her lips, she knew she had severed something irreparable. The other warriors shifted, hands twitching toward their weapons. Coalition soldiers responded in kind, raising their rifles. The tension was a thread pulled too tight, moments away from snapping. Rhys moved beside her, his stance relaxed, but ready. "So, what happens now?" Zalvin ignored him. His focus remained on Vela. "You dishonor yourself." Vela let out a bitter laugh. "I was dishonored the moment I fell on that battlefield, wasn't I? You left me. I should have died. But I didn't." Zalvin's jaw tightened. "You survived only because the humans intervened." "Yes," she said, voice unwavering. "Because he did." She gestured to Rhys. "He saved me when my own people would not. And now you come here, not to reclaim me, but to control me." "You do not understand," Zalvin said, stepping closer. "You are valuable to us. Your survival means you can still serve, you can still fight." "I can fight," Vela said, "but not for you." The words left her like a blade cutting through the past, severing her from everything she had once believed in. Zalvin studied her for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. "You have made your decision, then." "I have," she said. His gaze flickered to her cybernetic leg, then back to her face. "You are no longer Sthakari." She swallowed the sting that came with those words. She had known this was coming. And yet, part of her had still hoped. No. She had made her choice. "I do not need your name," she said. "I have my own." Zalvin gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The other warriors hesitated for a moment longer before following, their silence louder than any insult. As they disappeared into the darkness, Rhys let out a low whistle. "Well, that was dramatic," Vela huffed, shaking her head. "You humans do not know how to handle moments of importance, do you?" "Hey," he said, grinning. "I let you have your big speech, didn't I?" She smirked despite herself, but the weight of what had just happened settled in her chest. She had cut ties with her people. There was no going back now. A strange mix of fear and exhilaration filled her. For the first time in her life, she had no orders to follow, no predetermined path. She was free. The new beginning. The next morning, Vela stood on the edge of the coalition camp, watching the sun rise. It bathed the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, as if the sky itself had been reforged in fire. She heard footsteps behind her. "Couldn't sleep?" Rhys asked, standing beside her. She shook her head. "Too much to think about." He nodded, silent for a moment. Then, "So, what now?" She exhaled, watching the wind stir the dust at their feet. "I do not know. My whole life I have fought for someone else's war. I have followed orders without question. Now, I must decide for myself." Rhys tilted his head, and a small, determined smile tugged at her lips. "And I think I would like to fight for something that matters. Something I choose." Rhys grinned. "Well, if you're looking for work, the Coalition could use a warrior like you." She glanced at him. You vouch for me, human? He shrugged. Damn right I do. You're a hell of a fighter. And, you know. He smirked. I'd hate to let you walk off and get into trouble without me. Vela chuckled, shaking her head. You are insufferable. Yeah, he said, grinning. But you like me anyway. She rolled her eyes but didn't deny it. For the first time in a long time, the path ahead of her was uncertain. It was terrifying. And it was hers. She turned away from the rising sun, from the past she had left behind, and stepped forward, toward a future she would shape with her own hands. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and follow for more. Would you fight for tradition or carve your own path? Let me know in the comments. Frau.